All right, we are back here with another episode of our PCF Basics course. With me, as always, is Charles Shannon. Charles, how are you this morning?
Just lovely, Garrett. I got a nice cup of black tea and I'm ready for the day. Let's do this.
Yeah, I got my coffee here as well. So we're rocking and rolling with our caffeine this morning. All right. What do we got going on today? We've got the manifest part of the PCF tooling. Charles, is there anything you want to say off the top here?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about the manifest in very general terms early
hmm
on, but to recap that, the manifest is kind of where we're going to define for the application layer. What does our control do? What's its I/O? What is it made? What are the major elements that compose this control? So that it's easy for the platform to host us.
hmm
Today, what we're going to do is we're going to add a couple of properties, play around with it a little bit, and start to see what we can do with this.
Yeah, that sounds great. All right, so what's our first move going to be?
All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start to give this sample property, a little bit more use.
hmm
Instead of being sample property, let's retitle it to something that we actually care about. In
Okay.
our case, what we used it for was some text to put on the screen. So let's
hmm
call it display text.
All right, sounds great. Cool.
All right. So now that name that you renamed right there for everybody watching is actually the name that we're going to reference that property by here in the code, right? So when we run build on this again, it's going to rebuild that, rebuild types for us. That'll actually call it that. The display name key is actually what will display in the control. So in the previous runs of this in the test harness, you may have noticed that the property was called, property display key. We're going to rename that. So let's rename the display name as well to display text.
All right, sounds good.
All right, cool. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create another property. This display text here is just a single line of text, but let's say that we wanted something a little bit more complicated, like a number. We would add another property for that. Let's make
hmm
it just a little bit more complicated than that as well. And we're going to show another capability of these properties. So instead of just setting one property that can be one data type only, you'll notice that the manifest comes with some commented out code options that allow you to start to tweak the behavior and add in more capabilities. One of those is a property type group. And we're just going to uncomment this piece and use the example type group that they've provided, which they call numbers. But you can make type groups of any kind you want. Like you could create a type group of strings that is either single line or multi-line, or other types as well.
hmm
So let's uncomment that block, the type group there. We'll get rid of that description text. We've already created a new type group. So this allows us to create a property. Let's create a new property.
All right, we got one right here we could use.
Perfect. And this one is our number of smiley faces.
All right, call it number of smileys there.
Yeah, all right. And we'll change the display name as well.
Love autocomplete.
All
Um,
right.
Anything else needs to get changed here? Are we good?
And you'll notice that the of type group is set to number. So
hmm
because we use the type group, we can use any number property. We don't have to just use whole numbers. It could be whole numbers or floating point or decimal or even currency for all we care. Any kind of numbers will go in.
Cool, cool.
All right. Last thing we're going to do is we're going to make another tweak to this property. We're going to set it to just input. So there are three different usage types for properties in a PCF. There's input, bound, and output. Depends. The different ones are used for different contexts. Really, in a model-driven app, you're only ever going to use input and bound, whereas in a Canvas app, you're really only going to use, bound and output. But we can get in more detail about that later. In our case, we're just going to set this one to input, which allows us to use this property receive values, but never send out. A bound property allows us to receive values and send out values on the same one.
Cool, cool.
All right, and then we're good to go. Let's go ahead and fire an npm run build. And now that we've modified the properties that are in here, then we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and you may actually notice the file names here are in red, which means the editor is not happy because it's not finding our property anymore because it was previously
That's
named
right.
sample property. we changed the name. So
That's
let's
right.
do npm run build and see if it does anything for us. Waiting on the terminal. Waiting on the terminal. All right. Well, it's got errors, which is fine.
Yeah, it's because
Because we've
sample
still
property
got,
doesn't
yeah,
exist
exactly.
anymore.
Yep,
Right.
exactly. So let's patch that up.
Well, first thing,
What do we
let's
want to do?
take a look at the types,
Hmm.
the generated types, so that people can get
Yep.
to see this. When you run an npm run build and you've edited your manifest, this types file gets generated for you, and this is how we actually got the sample property before and why it disappeared. This file was regenerated without a value called sample property.
Hmm.
Anybody who's uh, a hardcore OOP programmer will appreciate this.
Yeah.
All right, now let's go over to index as you suggested. We'll fix that up. All
Yeah.
right, so we'll rename sample prop over to display text.
Yep. So we've got this here. And it's already suggesting it for us. We love that feature of VS Code.
Yeah,
Um,
VS Code's amazing.
all right. Yeah, it's pretty great.
All right,
We want to
and let's
start the
go ahead and
harness.
fire it, right? We should
Yeah.
see that it should behave exactly the same way.
Yep.
Let's go
So
to npm start watch.
yep. It'll open it up. I love that it opens its own tab too. That's pretty cool. Um, I must have sample properties somewhere else. Oh, it's in this file, my complete file. We'll change that real quick too, just so everything's happy. All right, starting the control harness. There we go. Here we
All right,
are. We now have our two properties here, which is very
and we
exciting.
can see that the display names have updated, right? We now have
Yep.
a display text property and a number of smileys property.
Mm-hmm.
So we're ready to go on these.
Awesome.
And what we want to do is now, I don't know, maybe do something a little bit more dynamic with it. All
Yeah.
right. So let's take the mydiv, let's scope it up to global, just something a little bit more, scalable way to do all this.
And then it's not going to like const, so we're going to make it private.
Mm-hmm.
So now we got that, and then we got to change
That's
prefix
right.
there. This my div. See if
Cool.
it's happy with that. It is indeed. Let's just play around with it just for a moment. Hello. All
Yeah.
right, so we're looking good there. All right.
All right, cool. And now we'll go down to the update
Yeah.
view and we'll start to add in some more stuff. First off,
Yeah. Let's bump out this
we're going
line
to
real
add in
quick.
smileys, right? We want to put in a number of smileys.
Yeah.
So we only want to do that if there aren't already smileys out there. So let's add a condition.
Mm-hmm. Let's see.
This dot
This.
mydiv dot child count.
Yep. Child element count. There we go.
Mhm.
Give it a triple equals for good measure.
Mhm.
And yep.
And we'll loop through our count.
All right. And then I is less than. We want to just say
Number of smileys, right?
yeah.
This
Just number of
context
smileys.
dot
So
properties dot number of smileys.
context dot is it parameters or
Parameters, yeah.
number of smileys?
I don't think you have to this dot because you have a context in update view.
That's true. Yeah, yeah. I also didn't need to put it in brackets. It's only if we were doing it. Yeah. So
Yeah. And then you want an I plus plus.
yep. Oops. There we go. Still not super happy here. What's wrong? Oh, we need to do dot value or
Oh, dot
something.
raw.
Dot raw. Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
All right. So got that figured out. Let's. What do we want to do? We want to append.
We'll create another div.
Yep. All right.
Yeah.
So,
Like const div2.
yep, equals create elements, and then we'll give that div.
Mhm.
All righty. Um, and
And then
then
div2 dot inner text is a smiley face.
inner text equals that. Then let me jump over, and then emoji picker. We love the emoji picker. And then there we go.
I use that keyboard a lot. I use the emoji
Yeah,
keyboard a lot.
that's pretty cool. All right. Do we want to give it a test in our harness here?
Well, now we need to append.
We do indeed need to append. It's true. So we want to do this dot
My div dot append child.
mydiv dot append child. And then we will provide div2 as our argument. And then there we go. Okay. So what are we thinking?
Yes.
Give it
I
a
think we need at least 4 smileys.
4 smileys? Okay.
Yeah.
We'll try 4. Ooh, that's great. But let's see about 5. Ooh.
We've already got 4, right? We
Yeah.
only do it once if it doesn't have children.
That's true. That's true. So maybe we can refresh. And there's our 5 smileys.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, that's pretty fun. Cool. Okay. Anything else we want to comment on?
Sure. Let's take a look at a couple other things. Back in the manifest, there are a couple of objects down lower that below the properties that we should talk about,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, there are some other things in here that matter. For the most part, in the manifest, properties are going to be what you deal with in it. You're going to do it in every single PCF you make. You're going to be tweaking those properties,
Yeah, everything needs
um,
property.
and oftentimes it's going to be the only thing you do in the manifest. But other than properties, we also have a section of the XML for resources. This would be where you'd include additional files or resources that are deployable as part of your bundle, right?
Mm-hmm.
But are not included in import statements in your TypeScript.
Okay.
So let's say you've got 5 TS files or TSX files that
Mm-hmm.
make up your control. You don't need to put them in resources because you'll be using import statements to bring them
Yeah.
in. But if you've got a CSS file or a resx or a PNG or an SVG, you will be putting them here.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We also have some other API capabilities that are by default not turned on. These would be API capabilities where you can think of them as like things that you would want to ask for permission for, right? An admin should know that you're trying to use the device capture audio or that you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to use the web API or what have you. So that's what these additional features are. Once they've been uncommented, just like type files, they get compiled and become accessible objects under context. The 2 main ones you probably use most often, or at least I use most often, are utility and web API.
Mm-hmm.
Web API, as you'd expect, gives you some easy functions for accessing simple web API operations. And by simple, I mean very simple. It's just your CRUD operations. So create, retrieve multiple, update, delete. That's
Yeah.
that's what those do. But they won't give you other more complicated things like associate, disassociate, or web API functions and actions, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the utility gives you a few basic operations like metadata, getting table metadata, and so on, which depending on what you're doing, especially if you're working with a dataset control, that can be very important.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right. I think that's pretty good as an introduction to these PCFs. Is there anything else, Garrett, that you think we should go through in the manifest before we move on to the next
No,
topic?
I don't think so. But yeah, the next topic, we'll cover deployment, how to get your PCF to where it needs to be, and I guess we'll see you all in the next video.
All right. Sounds good.
All right.
Thanks,
Thanks a
Garrett.
bunch. Yeah. Bye, everyone.